essentially any industry where you have more senior levels of the firm and then junior levels of the firm. So in finance, you go in as an analyst, or some firms call them associate analysts. And then associates are that next level where an MBA graduate or an analyst gets promoted to associate. And those are considered the more junior levels of the firm, where these folks have been in your shoes, if not less than maybe 5 years ago. So they know what it's like to go through that interview process. They know what it's like to be sitting at school trying to network with those young professionals. And they know about the day-to-day skills that you're going to need to succeed in those types of roles. So I think that's what I would look to if I was speaking to some of them. These folks are working incredibly hard, but often what I found is, at least for U of R alums, they're incredibly helpful and very willing to just take 15 to 30 minutes of their day if they have it. Some don't, and they'll tell you that, but there's no shame in reaching out to them and having them tell you that. If they have that time, just briefly discuss what they do, sort of where their firm sits within the industry, where their team sits within that firm, which I think is one of the biggest pieces of information that you can gain coming from school, going to, for instance, Goldman Sachs. There's 36,000 employees. There are a lot of different structures within that firm that I probably don't even understand now, even after working at the firm for 2.5 years. But these lower level employees, the juniors, can provide you with that type of information. When you're speaking, sometimes when you're networking, everyone wants to go talk to, the biggest name in the room and say that they've spoken to that big name. And, in reality, in my experience, it isn't just worth running around trying to talk to all of the big names, because there's obviously going to be much more demand on their time, both in their firm and externally from other young alums, from other students. Not that they can't provide you with great information, but I find that the more senior folks are better for mentorships, sort of developing a relationship with someone whose career path you envy, you look up to. You say, that's an interesting career path. I want to learn a little bit more about that. I like the way you think. And you can develop those mentorships, right, as you go. They're obviously going to have less contact with you than a junior alum could. But those are the types of relationships that you would develop with those senior folks. These people also have, they've been through those lower levels, and they are able to step back in their current role and sort of assess the industry. We all know that older folks have a little bit more wisdom than the younger folks do, and are able to have a better perspective on some of the heavier questions that you're going to be weighing. So, there's a place for both junior and senior in your network. And, it's just about knowing what I can gain from each of them. So, you don't want to go asking a senior level employee what the juniors on his team do. Just ask the juniors, right? So I think once you've found out where you are in the networking phase, you know who you want to reach out to because you know what type of information you want to gain, then you start crafting. And this is where the folks in the Career Center are going to be great for you. They've done this a million times, and they've had so many students sit across from them in your seat with very similar issues to what you're going through. So some things that I personally look for, and when I was putting this together, I briefly went back and looked through some of the messages that I've received over the years, mostly on LinkedIn. And, I think I came up with these very, very brief sort of, not do's and don'ts, but things that you should be looking to accomplish with your messages, and then things that you should avoid as you're going through. And I should step back by saying, it will all depend on the situation that you're in. So better to just have that perspective, but these are just some general tips going forward. So things that you want to do is seek clarity and concision. You want to have that clear story of, I'm a blank at the University of Rochester, I'm studying this. I'm interested in either your firm, learning more about your position. It's having that sense of, what do you want to get out of a discussion with this alum? And then I think you want to be sufficiently formal. So in my mind, it is always, personally, I don't go by Mr. Mulford, but it's always easier to go back from that formal level than it is to go forward. So if someone reaches out to me and calls me, hey, Nick, I'm probably not going to respond because that's too informal. But if you start by, you start, dear Mr. Mulford, when I come back to you and I say, hey, I'd love to chat, I'm free here, here, and here, looking forward to it, Nick, then you can go off of what I prefer to be called. I think that's something key that a lot of students might miss. Things to avoid. I think the biggest one for me is excessive flattery. So it is great to be very excited and anxious to meet with someone and to really sort of envy their position, to look up to what they have accomplished. But I think sometimes it goes too far in that, for instance, Goldman Sachs, like, I don't need someone to tell me that Goldman Sachs is a great brand, right? So just be genuine and know that, these folks are being reached out to by tens, if not hundreds of people. And the way that you are going to set yourself apart is by explaining sort of what you're hoping to get out of it, and giving this person a sense of, yeah, I can help you out and help you figure out those maybe 2 or 3 things that you're looking for. Avoid certain business terms. So I'd say, it's not very, very helpful for you, and you can actually hurt yourself if you try to get into the finance sort of frame of mind. And I even find folks who have been in the industry for 5 to 10 years doing this, where you're just using these finance terms without necessarily knowing how they're used in the industry. It can sometimes be that one thing that's just going to make the alum sort of close their email on you. And then excessive length. Obviously, we've said it before. These folks are incredibly busy. Just keep it short and sweet. Have that message, and then get it across. So this is sort of what I'm talking about with that formality. So I like to think about it as a scale. So it's not like, oh, this is going to be a business casual affair, or this is going to be a suit affair. You adjust to the level of formality that you're going into. So an interview is what I think of as sort of the most formal. So you be incredibly formal. You are interviewing for a position at that firm with people who you don't know. So it's best to be formal. And then as you move away from that, you get to things like coffee chats, which are a bit more informal. Informational interviews, like we were talking about before, where you do share that you are experienced with this professional, but you start out a little bit formal, and then you allow that alum to take it whichever direction that alum feels. If that alum is particularly informal and just wants to have a chat with you and is open, then that's fine. It'll evolve in that informal way. Sometimes they're a bit more formal, and they are, I guess, just a little bit less open. They view it as a yes, no, short answer type thing, and they will leave it at that. So I think it's best piece of advice for me, and best takeaway here, is just start formal and then let it shift as it shifts. So here are 2 sort of brief examples of that. I guess of everything that we've talked about, right? So of the formality scale, of knowing where you are in the networking process, right? Are you asking for advice, information, or is this a bit more targeted? And then taking a step back and knowing who you're talking to, what can this person give to me? So for instance, the one on the left is one that I responded to immediately. This person came to me and they said, this is after I accepted their invitation on LinkedIn. They said, here you go, I'm interning here. This is what I'm interested in. Can you meet for coffee to share your insights? Accommodative, clear, to the point, formal. I thought that was brilliant. Then I have another, and these folks are both I believe U of R alums, and these are from many years ago. This person had never contacted me before, interested in applying to a position that wasn't even in my division at the firm. So sort of jumped to that targeted level without going through any of the initial steps. So I think very important to step back and know where you sit in that sort of scheme. And then the biggest thing when I moved down to New York, so I know in my time at the U of R, there were maybe 4 or 5, and I know that the U of R typically hosts a finance and networking event in the city every June. Unfortunately, that one did not happen this year. But it can be intimidating to go to these networking events and not really know what you're doing there. But I think first and foremost, just don't put too much pressure on yourself. Maybe the night before the event, take a little bit of time to, if you can view the list of the attendees, that's going to be useful for you. Look at the firms that they're at, look at the roles that they're at. Have an idea of who you would like to talk to. And, sometimes it just doesn't always go that way. Maybe they didn't show up or they're surrounded by people, but have an idea of who you'd like to talk to and maybe some questions that you'd like to ask them. And these places are great for that informational portion of networking, right? You can, spend 10 minutes with someone discussing what they do, and then, walk over and spend 10 minutes discussing with someone else who's in a different industry. So it's great for that exploratory phase. I think you can better your networking first by bettering yourself. So, it's helpful to read up on the latest news in the Wall Street Journal if you're interested in finance. It's helpful to, have an idea of some research project or something that you've been working on, that you've been interested in, whether that's a very intense research project that you've been doing for a class, or whether, you're just interested in some M&A deal that happened and you would like to hear this person's sort of take on that. And then I think finally, something that I do notice happening at these events are sometimes people will run around and just sort of pop in, say hi, collect a business card, pop in, say hi, collect a business card. I would highly recommend trying to avoid that, because oftentimes the career center will have the list of attendees, and sometimes their contact information will be circulated. Even if not, you have LinkedIn, you can reach out to these folks, say, hey, sorry, I missed you at this networking event. I'd love to take 10, 20 minutes, hear about what you do and why that's interesting. And I think that developing a few better connections, as opposed to, running around and having 10 sort of surface level connections where, you didn't really say anything, you have a business card, but the person won't necessarily remember you. Whereas if you have a couple of more intense, in-depth conversations, the alum is more likely to remember you, more likely to refer you to other people, and who might have roles that you're interested in. And then finally, I think here for me, ending my long, arduous portion of this is to just give you 2 pieces of advice that you can do right now. I think one, it's to conduct more informational interviews. So, some of you might not have a clue what you want to do in finance, which is okay, because informational interviews are very easy to conduct, especially nowadays with everyone working remotely. Not everyone will respond to your LinkedIn request, and that's okay. They're busy, you know. But you will have people respond if you reach out in that formal, sort of clear and concise way. And, you know, so I would go browse LinkedIn. No one is afraid of, you know, no one's stalking their LinkedIn page, looking at who's looking at you. When a student looks at my LinkedIn page, it's just a notification that pops up and then it goes away. It's not something that I write down in a notebook somewhere. So I would say go look at LinkedIn, look at the Meliora Collective page, see what types of positions would like to learn more about. What firms would you like to learn more about? For some of you, you know, you might be targeting investment banking. Okay, well, you know what type of function you want to do. Go learn a little bit more about a certain product or a certain deal type that you're interested in. Learn a bit more about the firms that you're looking at. So you can always do informational interviews, just at different levels of information. And then second is to find a mentor. And this is someone, you know, you don't have to come guns blazing on the first message and say, I want you to be my mentor, because you don't even know that person yet. After conducting these informational interviews, there'll be some people who, you know, you just really click with, or you really sort of, their story speaks to you, that you find what they told you really, really interesting. These are people who you can develop that relationship with. You know, I just got an email this morning from, I've never said, hi, I'm your mentor, but, you know, we've developed a relationship and we email back and forth once a month and update each other on what's going on. So it's something that you can develop. I'd recommend having someone who's a little bit advanced from being out of school, just because those people, as we discussed, tend to have a broader perspective on industry, and they also have larger networks. So, you know, if you find a mentor who isn't necessarily in your field, the field that you'd like to go into, chances are that person, in their experience wherever they're working, has met someone who knows about the field that you'd like to go into. And that's going to be an easier way for you to get a referral and learn more about that position. So I think that's where I will leave it for today. You know, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. Feel free to send me an email if, you know, there's something I can do for you. And I'm happy to take anyone's questions.
So I think we're just going to have, if you have questions, if you just want to unmute yourself and go ahead and just ask Nick a question.
Hi, Nick. Thank you so much for your very informative presentation. My name is Irina. I am an incoming summer analyst at Jefferies. And I have a question. Reflecting back on your experience at the University of Rochester, would you do anything differently to prepare yourself better for a career in finance?
It's a great question. I think, you know, as I started with, I think I could have started doing informational interviews a bit more. You know, the firm, as I said, the firm that I wound up at, I didn't even know existed when I took my junior year internship. And it turned out to be, in my opinion, the greatest sort of training program that a young person right out of school can have. So I think, yeah, and it's not a case of starting your informational interviews earlier per se, because these are things that can be done in rapid succession, especially over the summer when everyone's working remotely. So I think it's doing more of those informational interviews and casting a broader net to find out, you know, what types of jobs are available to people who are interested in finance.
Thank you very much.
Hi, Hi, Nick. Thanks for the presentation. I do have a question specifically regarding the amount, like asking questions and going into a bit more detail whenever you have to explain something, or explain rather your question you want to ask, or when you're targeting somebody for networking. My specific question is, how do you make that real, or when can you realize that you can maybe go into a bit more detail with certain questions that you have? And do you decide if you can, ask a question over an email, over a call, and how do you make that trade-off? Because on email, you kind of have this ability to have evidence that's retained of the specific details of a question, whereas on a call, it's a lot less, it's a bit more mutable and it's not exactly permanent. So how would you go about determining when you can get into a bit more detail, and what medium would you recommend?
I think it's entirely dependent on what sort of conversation you're having. I can see where some things would be useful to have after the fact. So for instance, if I'm going to do an informational interview, when I sit down, I have a notepad right next to me, jotting down notes that this person's saying. In finance, there is a lot of jargon, so that's incredibly useful to know. If I'm doing something that's more targeted, it's generally because I already know the person and have some level of trust with that person. So I tend to do that face-to-face at a coffee chat or on the phone, less so than over email, just because email can be a little bit, it hits less, is what I'll say. But sometimes email can be incredibly useful. So if you're going to ask someone a very intricate question about, what products they work on and all of that, sometimes it's easier for them to just type out an email to you, and they'll, it's best to offer them that option.
Thank you.
Hi, Nick. I have a question on following up in networking. So you talked a lot about the first impression, reaching out, and something that I guess, something that I bump into is, how do I follow up and when should I? Because there's kind of the ticking time bomb where if you wait too long, then then the relationship could go stale and they might forget about you. But at the same time, if you just reach out without having any value or genuine, questions. So how do you recommend following up?
It's a great question. And it's something that so when I was preparing I'll get to your networking session question, but this one will be more for after you've had an interview following up. So I vividly remember my team and I at Goldman, when I told my boss that I was departing, we began interviewing candidates to come in, and we were discussing our preferences. So this is just a group of 6 people, take it with a grain of salt. But I personally find just a short note, hey, it was great talking to you. I enjoyed our discussion about blank. And then you leave it at that, sort of. And that maybe not immediately after. So sometimes waiting until the day after, remind that person that you enjoyed having that discussion. And then if you need to, you have further questions, follow up a week after the fact by replying to that email, so that they can see that you've reached out and now you have this sort of follow-up question. For interviewing specifically, I would say I avoid, unless something in the interview has caused you to follow up with a very lengthy email, I avoid, writing a 4-paragraph response following up on an email. We've had that, and it's often very genuine and very well thought out, but it's not necessarily what you're expecting following that interview. So for networking, I think it can be very useful. I would say, the next day, if the event is on a Friday, certainly by Monday, respond to, follow up. It was great chatting with you whenever, last night. You know, at the networking session, I thought your comments about blank were insightful. I'd love to get to know more about this or that. And if you don't necessarily have that follow-up ready, just send it without that. Send, I enjoyed speaking to you about blank. Hope to keep in touch, you know? And then you can follow up on that email, whatever, a month later, and it will sometimes go stale, but you know, that's what happens. Sometimes it does. Follow up on that email and then come back with whatever you found in that month that you're looking for.
Hello, Mr. Mulford. Thank you very much. So my question is, how do you properly ask for a referral after making connection with someone?
It's a good question, and even recently, I've had some different experiences with this. So I think it's easiest when, you know, you talk about something or the alum talks about something on the call, and it's not their realm of expertise, but you've expressed your interest in it. So for instance, I was talking to someone who was a little bit more interested in super quantitative finance. So I was talking about the strats team at Goldman and how they're sort of developing more intense computer code than what my team was developing. And, you know, a day later, the person followed up and said, you know, I really found your description of the strats team interesting. Do you happen to know anyone down on that team that you could refer me to? So I think that's the most natural way to do it. I'd say just having having that referral question be your last planned question of the call sometimes works, sometimes doesn't, because you know, if your only expressed interest on the call is for, you know, say, we'll use an example, for my specific team, and you just want to know what my team does, asking for a referral after that, I don't really have a great place to send you, if that makes sense, right? I've told you what my team does and sort of what that experience is like, and my teammates would tell you the same exact thing. They wouldn't really be able to shed any more light on it. So I think if you can direct that ask for a referral somewhere, so whether that's to another team, to maybe someone else's experience at a different firm. So for instance, you know, I've had folks ask me, do you know anyone else working in research at a bulge bracket bank? I'd love to get their opinion. So any direction that you can provide is going to make it more likely for someone to refer you.
Does anyone have any other questions for Nick before we end this session?
Hi, Nick. I have a question, not necessarily that pertains to this Zoom session, but just kind of about Goldman and what their hiring prospects look like in the upcoming months, given the whole situation with the market recession. I actually was on track with the operations associate role at Goldman back in February and leading into March. And then after the whole COVID incident happened, the trail kind of went cold. And after checking the website again recently, I saw that they're planning on opening up the applications for the analyst role in July. But I also know that a lot of the tech companies and finance companies are not really reopening the application for new roles in the upcoming months. So I was wondering if you have any insight into that with Goldman.
It's a great question. So I have left Goldman to pursue my MBA this fall. And that's one thing that I will say from an investment banking perspective is that sort of outside of my immediate team, you know, everything is handled by the recruiters, and individual folks really won't have any insight into specific roles. So I'm unfortunately not going to be much help there.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Any other questions before we wrap up?
I have one quick question. Sorry for taking your time. Most of us are probably going to have virtual internships this summer. And so I was wondering if you can give any advice on how to be effective at networking where you cannot just sort of bump into the person in the office and start the conversation more naturally. How to make this sort of networking process virtually more natural.
Yeah, that's another great question, and it's something that we're all going to figure out. I'm going to figure it out this fall, and hopefully I do. I would say when you're going to be an intern physically at a bank, it's expected you're going to just be networking like crazy. You're having coffee chat a day, maybe two. So I would think that would still be the case virtually. It's expected that you're going to be chatting with a lot of people, learning about different roles within the bank. So I would say reaching out to folks I would start by reaching out to people who have that touch point for your current job. So, whatever you're doing, you spoke to someone in this division, this team, ask them if they have 15 minutes to tell you what it was like, what it's been like working for them. And looking sort of from the outside in, they're going through the same thing that you're going through. They've been working remotely for probably 2 to 3 months now, and they're just as weirded out by Zoom calls and having to do everything virtually. So don't be super intimidated by whatever method you reach out to them with.
Thank you very much. I'll try and experiment with that. I'll let you know how it goes.
Nick, we just want to say thank you. So thank you for the Green Center, for sharing all these great insights. We hope this was really helpful for students as well. And thank you for providing your contact information in case anyone has further questions. And for the students who are on this call, we have recorded it, so you can find this on the Green Center's website. And we will have, this is one of a series. So we do have another session tomorrow at 4:30. And that will be a technical workshop, financial modeling session with another alum. So please feel free to join us as well tomorrow. And Nick, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Have a great night, everyone.
Bye. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.